Once we ascertain what a product is worth and to whom, which in theory defines the customer's willingness to pay, then the next question we ask ourselves is, well, what do we want to do? That's from a strategy perspective.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the hopefully healthy relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving. Today our guest is David Mock. Here are 3 things you want to know about David before we start. He is Senior Director of Pricing Strategy and Analytics at Johnson & Johnson. Huge title. He's done pricing in semiconductors and hard disks, fields that I personally have experience in and love those fields. But I think what we're going to talk the most to him about today is he teaches a pricing class at UC Berkeley. And by the way, that's where I got my doctorate. Welcome, David.
Hey, glad to be here, Mark, and thank you for having me.
Hey, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Hey, let's start. How did you get into pricing?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question. I would say I actually stumbled upon it.
I think most people do, by the way.
Very early on, I started as a product manager when I worked at a semiconductor company. I love product management, largely worked in launching new products. And one day, one of the senior directors asked me if I want to go over to pricing. And I said, no, I actually like what I'm doing in product management. And next thing I know, even though I said no, I was over there. And that's kind of how my career in pricing started. So yeah, I kind of stumbled upon it. And
well, here's the interesting question. Are you happy that you got shoved into pricing?
Yeah, I think I am. I think what's quite intriguing about pricing is it's a field that touches so many different parts of the organization. And what I mean by that is, in order to do well in pricing, you have to really know product management quite well. You need to understand the customer very well as well. You need to be able to dialogue with our finance people. So one of the things that I discovered is, in order to do pricing well, it's a multidisciplinary area where you tend to develop expertise in lots of different areas. You develop expertise in costing, finance, in product management, in sales, in negotiation, right? So it's been a ride of fabulous career, so I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I couldn't agree with you more in terms of we touch so many different places inside an organization. We have to understand all those different roles. We have to be able to talk to them, communicate with them, influence them. So I love the concept of pricing. I think it's a blast. So let's talk about pricing people today. Not putting prices on people, but let's talk about the world of people and pricing people. Do you have pricing people who work for you now?
I do. I started as a force of one here at Johnson & Johnson a number of years ago. And we actually grew the team now to, on my side, we have a team of 10.
Nice.
And it's a function that we're continuing to build, just because I think companies are realizing that it's really an important part of our business, where I would say several years ago hasn't been a focus of the company. And it hasn't been a focus of the company just because pricing was actually quite simple to hear in healthcare, because one of the things we would do is we would raise prices, and if you didn't get the price right out of the gate, the company would tend to raise prices at least once, if not twice a year. So any sins you've committed gets easily rectified. But in today's world of healthcare, it's actually the opposite, right? Where pricing is actually under a lot of pressure, and industry willingness pay is coming down. So the need to develop pricing expertise and to build pricing muscle across the company is really, really important, because if you think about some of the challenges that we have, let's just play around some simple math.
Okay.
And I'm going to just talk generic term. For a $1 billion business, let's just say if you lose say, 1% on price, what does that work out to be?
That's only $10 million.
That's $10 million.
Almost as much as I make a year.
Right. So what if you lose like 5% on price? $50 million, right? So let's just take some nice round number. And it's not reflective of any company specific item, but let's say $1 billion, nice round number, you lose 5% of price, $50 million. How are you going to make up $50 million, right? And just ask yourself, what is an average product launch? What do you actually get out of an average product launch, right? A lot of the product launch are not big ones. So you might actually, in order to make up for $50 million, you might have to have lots of product launches just to make that up.
Yeah. And that 50 million, by the way, is all profit dollars.
That's right.
So you might need to do 100 million or 200 million if you actually want to replace those profit dollars.
That's exactly right. And so what a lot of people don't realize, and the math is actually quite simple as we just went through, is that is one of the most powerful lever that's in your control to deliver bottom line profit. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let me ask you, what skill sets do you think make a great pricing person? So you can think about the people that are on your team, think about the skills that you've used over the course of your career.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Mark. And I think the answer is it depends. If in the world of pricing, there's a number of areas you can get into. You could get into the deal desk side, which is you spending your time largely with salespeople negotiating on a deal, and it gets very, very tactical. You could get into pricing that could be more strategic, right? Which means you're working closer to marketing, product management, and even R&D with new products, right? Or you could be in pricing where you're dealing with systems and tools, and you could have pricing you could focus on within a region, or you could have pricing that's focused on globally. So let's just think about that for a second. So think about, wow, pricing can cover so many different areas. Now, to get back to answering your question, Mark, if your focus is going to be more around the price setting piece, you tend to work closer with product marketing, product management, right? Arguably even R&D, right? And so the skill sets you have to have, the way I like to look at that is, if I have to put it simply, is someone that knows marketing very well, but have deep focus and expertise on pricing. Now, on the flip side, if you're more on the deal desk side, I think the skill sets that's needed in pricing would be someone that would know negotiation very well, someone that has a thick skin, someone who can just operate objectively by standards. It's someone that salespeople can work with. Right. And so that's the kind of skill sets that you might need, and certainly financial savvy as well.
Yeah. So
because the range of pricing spans very different areas, you need a mix of those skill sets. Now imagine if one of these days you want to become a global pricing leader and all these things come into play. So think about the skill sets that you have to build. All right. So from price setting, which is be able to converse with strategically at the global level, at the product management level, and arguably even R&D level. And yet you can actually talk to salespeople, negotiate customers, go meet customers, talk to them. And that's really the quite exciting part of pricing, is because it covers that span of area. And eventually you might want to launch enterprise pricing software. So then you have to develop skills in terms of how you would deploy pricing software that covers that gamut of all the things we just talked about.
Yeah.
And then if you get into a global role, then and be able to manage pricing across different parts of the world.
So I actually love that answer, David. Usually when I answer that question, I say there's three things that I use the word pricing champion needs. And those three things are, they have to be really an expert in pricing. So you have to understand pricing and all the strategies and things like that. You have to be comfortable with data. You don't have to be a statistician, but you have to be comfortable looking at it, knowing what's possible. And then the third one, which is the one that I think most pricing people don't have, is the ability is leadership, essentially. It's the soft skills. How do I influence people? How do I work with teams so that I can really make big things happen inside my company?
Yeah, I want to build on your third point that you mentioned, Mark, right? I've been doing pricing for a number of years. there are very few things that I actually own, right?
Yeah.
Because if you think about, hey, I'm working product manager. Well, who owns the product strategy? Well, it's the product manager, right? Or I'm working with the account team. Well, who owns the relationship with the account team? Who owns the account strategy? Well, it's the field. So in pricing, there are very few things that we actually own. That means the bulk of what we do is really around influence, our ability to influence across the organization. And sometimes that's tough.
Yeah. And so I'm going to put some horrible words in your mouth, and so you can take them back out in just a second. Um, people who tend to go into pricing seem to me to be more nerd-like, number crunching, and they tend not to have this leadership influence capability. Would you agree, disagree? What do you think?
Yeah, there's certainly that there's a segment of roles within pricing where what you just said, Mark, I think is absolutely needed. And I would say those people are like your data scientists, right? So these people will understand, different ways of looking at data. They can, and it's critical, and that part of pricing is critical. And those are skill sets where a lot of people don't have, is how do you actually look at data and how do you make sense of data? And people with strong analytical operational background are really quite important, right? Now, having said that, oftentimes I think people with that background where how do we get value, how do they add value in the organization, is they're going to need to either interface with people that are closer to what's customer facing, really understand the realities of the marketplace, and be able to make sense of that data. Because sometimes when you look at, I'll give you a great example, right? And sometimes we would have data scientists who would come in and say, hey, based on my elasticity modeling, we think your price should be able to go from X. Your price should be able to go from X to Y, and you should be able to drive this number. But the reality is, in some cases, and this is the reality part that I want to talk about, is in one part of our business, we're not a retail organization, and so a lot of our demand is not direct demand, meaning I communicate directly to my end consumer, and a lot of demand is derived demand, meaning I interface with the intermediary, which then interface with the end consumer. So any elasticity modeling there doesn't really pan out, right? So those are some examples of where I think in order for some of those, I think you call them a nerd-like number crunching folks, it's really, they're absolutely needed, really valuable in my opinion. But to bring value to that is to have those people collaborate, work very, very closely hand in hand with the people that are in the day-to-day, who actually understands the day-to-day operations of how things really work with the customers, and strategically what we want to go and what we want to drive.
Yeah. And I think the people who do the day-to-day work, the pricing strategists, let's call them for the sake of argument, I think these people have to understand what's possible with data. What data do we have? What kind of information might be hidden in there? They may not know how to get it out, but they ought to be able to say, look, here's a model. Let's go test this model.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Mark. And I think that's the happy partnership between the two different sets of organizations. And that's why pricing is such an interesting field, because if you're looking for a career in pricing, it touches so many different areas, from systems, tools, what we just talked about, the deep data science analytics, the tactical piece, the customer facing, the strategic thinking, the price setting, right? The driving an entire region strategy. So you can see all those things require different skill sets. And that's why I think over time, as pricing starts evolving, it's really a fantastic opportunity for anyone looking to make a career out of pricing, or even if you do a short tour in pricing, right? A number of those fields will actually make you, if you're a product manager, will make you become a better product manager, for instance, right? Or if you're a salesperson, maybe make you a better salesperson. If you're a marketing person, it actually makes you think, helps you actually become a better marketer, because it forces you to think through things that you might have just glossed over on the pricing side. So.
Time out for a quick ad. If you're currently working in a subscription business, I'm guessing this is what your world feels like. Oh my gosh, the CEO just said we need to grow faster. I already have too many things to do. Now what are we adding? Which of these things should I be doing? If I only sleep 4 hours and I come in earlier, I can get more done. Well, here's my advice. You can go with the flow and do what you're told. I mean, doing busy work and doing what other people tell you to do isn't the worst job in the world. After all, I used to dig ditches for a living. Or there's a better alternative. Take responsibility. You determine what drives your product's growth. When you choose the right activities and then execute them well, it boosts your career. To help you drive your product's growth, we put together a powerful online course called Accelerate Your Subscription Business. This course provides you the framework that helps you decide which of your tasks are most important right now. Most importantly, though, it helps you think strategically about your subscription business, not just about your tactics. The course is only $500. What a tiny investment considering what this could do for your company and your career. To learn more, go to www.championsofvalue.com. I look forward to seeing you there. I believe wholeheartedly that companies should be, I call them value-based businesses, which means that as a company, we should be creating, communicating, and capturing value. And the only way we do that is to understand what value really means. And it's pricing people who know that. We don't know how consumers value our products, but we know how to think about value. We know how to help the rest of the company understand this is what value is.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, Mark, because if I have to simplify pricing to these two things, it's really this. And I know I'm oversimplifying this, but the first question when we go about developing pricing strategy, the first question we ask is this. We ask ourselves, what is this product worth and to whom?
Yep.
Boils down to, well, what's the value of this product? And unless you know that, it's hard to do anything beyond that. Once we ascertain what a product is worth and to whom, which in theory defines the customer's willingness to pay, then the next question we ask ourselves is, well, what do we want to do? That's from a strategy perspective. Well, do we want to go after the whole market? Do we want to be a niche player? Do we want to be a premium? Do we want to charge a premium? And there's a whole number of things that we can do in terms of the strategy. So if I have to leave your audience with two simple things to think about, right? It's the first thing you got to think about is what's your product worth and to whom, right? Second question is, what do you want to do? And that, I think when you think through a number of those things around pricing around those elements, I think it'll help you have a more commercial, successful strategy.
I love those two. I think they're really, really powerful. So, hey, let's switch gears just slightly. Since do you teach an undergrad class and an exec ed class on pricing at Berkeley?
Yeah, I teach the executive education class at Berkeley, so specifically in the product management program. And every once in a while, I think Berkeley does a specific pricing course. So I teach both of those courses.
Okay. And what I want to know is, what do you teach? Right? What are the skill sets that we teach? And I don't know, which one do you think is more interesting? I would say executive education is probably more interesting. Let's do that first.
Yeah, the executive education is kind of where I spend my time, right? And I think a lot of students the profile of students that come in there, a number of them already have their MBA program. They may or may not have a pricing background. And a lot of them are technologists. So one of the things that we try to do there at Berkeley is have a mix of theoretical, which is from the university staff, and a mix of practical, which is someone like myself who's a practitioner in there. And so one of the things we actually go over on the pricing section, because it's largely a class of product managers looking to, launching new products or disrupt the world with things that they're working on, is to really help them think through, where does price play within their commercial strategy, right? And those 2 points that we just articulated a few minutes ago, we spend a lot of time talking through those 2 points. And the way we talk through those 2 points is we use something that what we create is called a pricing canvas framework, that I use at the university scene and I actually use here at Johnson & Johnson. And it's been a very, very useful framework that we use here in the company. And I think students at Berkeley also find it quite useful. So the pricing canvas really focuses around those 2 points we talked about earlier. Hey, what's your product worth and to whom? And what do you want to do? And we really start with who's your target customer. And then based on our target customer, and then the building blocks are, your target customer. Then it talks about your market strategy. Market strategy basically essentially what's your goal and what are your strategic imperatives to achieve those goals. And put another way, like how will we win? Right? And then we talk about your value proposition, your offering structure, and then we get into the price level or the price strategy, and then we get into price rules and policies. So that's a framework that we use to actually educate the product manager, and we've been doing that for a few years and seems to be working quite well.
Nice. Very glad to hear that. Tell me if you think this is right or not, but I find that most people can't answer that first question that you ask, and that's what's the value of the product or what's it worth to somebody. And I think that if we could get more people just to think about that, it would change business.
Yeah, you know what, Mark, you're 100% spot on. And the reason why, I think part of the reason why people struggle to answer that question, I would say is twofold. First, I think most everybody think they know who the target customer is. Mm-hmm. And I've been working with hundreds of product managers over the years between, just my job, between what I do at work and the university setting. And I could honestly say the one area where people often don't do as good of a job as they should is identifying who ultimately is their target customers. The typical response I would hear from product managers would say, hey, my target customer is, I want to go after our customers who are using our competitive products, right? I say, okay. And that's typically the comment I would hear. But in reality, the way we like to think about, who your target customer is, you think about, well, what's the job? Is a jobs to be done framework that we like to use or think of? And then what jobs are we trying to help the customer do a better job of, right? So you think about segmentation through a jobs framework. At the end of the day, there's a job that a customer wants to get accomplished. And in trying to accomplish that job, your customers go face all these obstacles. So how does our product actually help the customer achieve that job while overcoming those obstacles? And that starts defining what is your product worth. Because sometimes you could say, hey, my product, instead of turning 3 times, I can accomplish the job in turning 1 time. Well, honestly, is that really important to the customer? Right? It could be different, but is it really important? So it's really trying to understand things that's really important to the customers, that's differentiated, right? And our ability to accomplish what that job to be done. And once you understand that, then there's a number of techniques. You could read from a book anywhere around how would you quantify your worth. You could do market research around that. And there's a whole bunch of techniques that's out there to do that. But I would say the starting point is really understanding who really is your target customer and really understanding what are you actually trying to get accomplished and how do you do it better than their next best alternative solution.
Yeah. I got to ask the question on the target customer though. Do you think people don't know their target customer because they don't know it or they're afraid to focus?
Wow. I would say people generally have an idea who their customers are, but they don't understand what is it that they value. And in order to truly understand what they value, I think that's what I kind of talked about, is really fully understanding what exactly gets back to the jobs discussion that we just talked about, right? And that's a struggle that I see, and people don't necessarily think through that as well as I think as they can be. And I think everybody knows who they're currently selling to, who the customers are buying, but I don't think they fully grasp what the customer is trying to get done and what is really truly important to them and how their offering is something that's above and that is actually creates value above and beyond their next best alternative. I think that's the struggle.
Yeah, I could see that completely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
David, I have been having a blast doing this, but it looks like we're out of time. Before we wrap it up though, What's one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact?
Yeah, I would say the one piece of advice is think about your role and what you can control. There are a number of things we could do in pricing, right? And don't try to boil the ocean. And let's say if you're a product manager, so typically what does a product manager control? Well, in theory, you should control the commercial strategy, and price is part of commercial strategy. So I would say a piece of advice is don't boil the ocean, know what you can influence, start small, get some success, and continue to build on success. If you're the product manager, my advice is have a price strategy and get everybody aligned to it. And if I ask you this very simple question, and question about your product is, what is your price strategy? And if you are fumbling for words right now, I would argue that you don't have one. So my first piece of advice is have a price strategy and get alignment.
Nice. Excellent. David, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
They could reach me at my personal email at David, T as in Tom, .mok@gmail.com. So that's davidt.mok@gmail.com.
Perfect. Episode 48's all finished. I got to say, my favorite part of today was when we talked about the different roles based on what type of pricing or what part of pricing we're going to be in. David, did you have a favorite part?
I think my favorite part is I actually enjoyed the working with product managers and a strategic pricing side. So I enjoyed that thoroughly.
Nice. And to our listeners, what was your favorite part? If you have one, please let us know in the comments of wherever you downloaded and listened. While you're at it, would you please give us a 5-star review? They're very helpful to us. And remember, we launched a new community called championsofvalue.com. If you go to community.championsofvalue.com, you can see all of the writings and things that I publish for free. They're available there, and that's where we have most of our conversations. If you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.